Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. My name is Carson Atwood, and in this presentation I will be taking you through an analysis of the Correlates of War dataset, where we'll explore the data science concepts and practices that can be applied to understand the dynamics of interstate conflict. The Correlates of War project is a comprehensive resource that aims to systematically accumulate scientific knowledge about war. The project provides detailed and reliable quantitative data in the realm of international relations, which allows for various types of analysis on the patterns and causes of war. Today we'll focus on interstate conflicts from the period of 1820 to 2007, highlighting how industrialization has transformed the way nations engage in and sustain conflicts. One important note to make before proceeding any further is that what I will be presenting today isn't just data. When I discuss total deaths as a result of a conflict, it isn't just a data point. Each life lost is a tragedy, no matter the war, the time period, or the location on the globe. Each number represented much more than a number to the families and friends of those who died in these conflicts. Here we see the initial form of the dataset. It's composed of 337 rows and 25 columns, detailing numerous variables from war numbers, names, and types to dates and participant states. This raw data provides a foundation for us to understand individual conflicts in detail, but requires significant processing for analytical purposes. The data was initially structured around a specialized coding system. To make sense of this, I employed the code book offered by the Correlates of War, which allowed me to translate these codes into a narrative that was more insightful and interpretable for my analysis. After tidying the dataset, you can see that it is more streamlined, now with 95 rows and 7 columns. This refined structure includes essential information such as the start and end dates of conflicts, total deaths, participants, and the name of the war. The tidying process is crucial as it enabled me to focus on the most relevant data for my analysis. This graph illustrates the total combat deaths over time. It emphasizes the sheer scale of casualties in conflicts like World War I and World War II. Notice how these two conflicts are considerable outliers to all other wars in the last 200 years. This provides an important insight, and it's invaluable for understanding the magnitude of these two conflicts to all others. For clarity, in future plots, RStudio is using scientific e-notation for large numbers. So when we look at the total battle deaths from World War II, and we see that that number is over 15 million, when the majority of these 95 conflicts have under 100,000 total battle deaths, it's really hard to see the scale of how these other battles compare to one another, separated from World War I and World War II. So this is something that we're going to have to take a deep dive into as we move through analyzing this data set. This graph was essential for conveying the breadth of the data set I analyzed. Visualizing all 95 conflicts together, though, it poses a challenge, especially when you look at the labels, and again, when you look at the total casualties of World War I and World War II, and how those basically eliminate the casualty figures for all other conflicts, or not all other conflicts, but many other conflicts. But this visualization, it highlighted the need for a more detailed, granular examination of the data. And I did that by breaking it down. So these are the top 10 deadliest conflicts. So zooming in here are the top 10 deadliest conflicts over the last 200 years according to our data set. The world wars, of course, stand out, but you can see other post-industrial 20th century wars also feature fairly prominently, like the Iran-Iraq War, Phase 2 of the Vietnam War, the Third Sino-Japanese War, and the Korean War. I also decided to take a look at the 10 most frequent participants in conflicts. So this bar chart identifies the most frequent participants in conflicts. Notably, France tops the list, followed by the United Kingdom and the United States. And this, of course, reflects the historical geopolitical influence and military engagements of these nations. This histogram shows us the frequency of conflicts over time. There's a noticeable concentration in the early and mid-20th century, corresponding with the two world wars, and a varied frequency in the years following. You can see that very early on in the data set, such as 1840, we had a period of relative peace, and part of that is tied into the result of after the Napoleonic Wars, where European nations came together and created something known as the Concert of Europe, where they worked together to prevent revolutions rather than have international conflict amongst themselves. So peace and relative stability. Of course, that all ends with the Crimean War, and from that point forward, there's going to be quite a bit of conflict. This chart breaks down the deadliest conflicts by decade, highlighting the catastrophic human cost of the world wars, while also showing a persistent pattern of conflict through the 19th and 20th centuries. This graph illustrates the deadliest conflict of each decade. We see a visual representation of history's grim tally, with the peak in the 1940s corresponding to World War II, a conflict that, due to its scale and global impact, far exceeds all others in recorded history. But again, we can see this move to total war, and then the scale back to limited wars. But progressively, as we have industrialization, conflicts become very deadly. You see that scale. Looking closer at total deaths by decade, we see the contrast between the 1800s and 1900s. The escalation in fatalities over time is evident, particularly with the advent of the 20th century, signaling a shift in the nature and lethality of industrialized warfare and the movement toward total war, then a retreat to limited war. Looking at the scale of the 1800s, 1870 was the deadliest decade for battle deaths, and if we were to compare that to this scale, it would be smaller than the 1950 decade, more deaths in the 1950s than in the 1870s. So it just shows that we're on two different scales there. As we break down the 19th century by decade, we observe the conflicts contributing most to the death tolls, notably the Crimean War and Lopez or Paraguayan War, highlighting the era's characteristic conflicts, which were often regional but intense in their devastation. Continuing with the 1800s, each bar represents the human cost of conflicts like the Second Russo-Turkish War and the Franco-Prussian War. These figures not only reflect military strategies, but also the technological advancements in weaponry as we move forward through time. Turning to the 20th century, we see the scale of death rise dramatically with World War I and the first total war effort by nations. See here. As we progress through the century, we see the totality of the concentrated effort of destruction carried out in World War II, where nations once again used every means at their disposal to achieve victory. Then we see a drawback and a move to operation of limited war with the Korean War and the Vietnam War in the 1950s and 1960s, respectively. We see conflicts like the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s again show a significant loss of life. And finally, as we reach the close of the 20th century and into the 2000s, there's the Gulf War and the wars in the Balkans. They mark significant events in the 1990s. In the 2000s, the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq demonstrate that the human cost of conflict is quite large, even using the modern form of limited war. Each data point in this presentation is more than a number. It represents lives, societies, and histories altered by conflict. It's a stark reminder of the cost of war and why understanding these patterns is crucial for our understanding the potential of future conflicts. Thank you for your attention. I wish you all the best of luck on your presentations.